All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Nelson. I'm principal of Wootton. Happy Friday to you all. It's really nice to be here with you. Just a little bit about our meeting today. We have at the principal's coffee chat a number of questions that have been submitted, a little bit about the questions that have reached me today. They really kind of fall in two categories. Like one is we have a number of questions around the incidence of anti-Semitism and hate bias at our school, and a number of questions about that. So the very first part of the meeting is I've kind of categorized those questions, and we're going to start with that general update and devote a bit of our time this morning specifically to that, as that appears to be a topic that individuals would like more information about. And once we've got through those submitted questions, I feel like it makes a lot of sense with our questions and this morning to then also take questions specifically about this topic. And once we have moved through those, then we have other questions that have submitted on other topics. So we're going to kind of categorize this morning's coffee chat into these two areas, and that's just a little update about framing for you all. If this is your first time participating in a principal's coffee chat, please know that we're going to approach questions in really two ways. The first are the questions that have been submitted in advance, as sometimes there's information that's been prepared and we want to take you back to, or I want to take you back to some resources, so on and so forth. So we're going to start with those questions and then we'll open it up. If you want to ask a specific question, you can just do that by putting your question in the chat, and then we will get to that as a follow-up. So that is how things work. So we're going to go ahead and get started with then this first update, and specifically, we're going to be doing the update about anti-Semitism. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. So there were 4 specific questions submitted about this topic, and just a little note about it. I want to acknowledge about talking about a topic such as this is a challenging one. We know that when schools are confronted with an act like anti-Semitism or an act of hate bias, whatever that is, there is a lot of impact that comes from that. And here at Wootton, we know that I've communicated about 3 specific incidences over the last few weeks. And so I just want to acknowledge to everyone the challenge that we face. But I really hope the following, right? That I'm going to provide you with some information that gets those questions answered. And when I think you are facing a challenging information, a couple of things really help. Not only being informed, which I just referenced, but the other thing that really helps is knowing that the gears continue to move forward and that actionable work continues to happen. And so I really hope to give you some of that information today. So appreciate having the opportunity. There are a couple of questions that center around this topic specifically, and this is where we'll begin, and that is, can you give an update on the work and investigation that has taken place at Wootton around anti-Semitism and hate? And I'm happy to do that. I believe it was in the 3rd community message that I shared with everyone. There was a link to a specific document that are the guidelines in which a school will work on an incident of hate bias. And so I kind of want to start there. I want to reassure everyone that if there is ever an incident like this, and for the 3 that we've specifically had, we have investigated each of those incidences, and we have utilized those guidelines as the step-by-step process so that we know we are doing what we need to do in order to look into the matter. And then we address what we can address based on what we find and learn from that investigation. So all of those investigations we have tackled those. And the way we really go about conducting that investigation is we first receive the information, most oftentimes from a staff member, but it does not always come to us from a staff member. But most oftentimes it begins with a staff member, as was the case with each of these. One actually reached us by a student, and then we start to investigate. And we do that by conducting interviews, taking a look at camera footage that we see around the date and time in which something happened. We utilize documents that are available to us that kind of at a school, we oftentimes know that we're using class lists, we're using rosters and seating charts, and any of those structures that we have in place to learn what we can based upon what has been reported to us. And if we can identify someone who did this, then we would address, what we call here the perpetrator. An update here is we have investigated all three of those. We have not identified a specific student who has done this. But I also want to let everybody know the investigations did reveal to us some information that I have found helpful. And so we don't generally give open information about the investigation because putting that out there can work against us if we have to investigate again. But I want you to know, as someone who has conducted investigations for a number of years at schools, there were things that really revealed themselves while we were investigating. So though we didn't get a perpetrator, which I know is important and individuals really like to know whether we identified the person, for the security and the administrative team, we have information that we did not have before. So that was helpful. And last little note on this, our guidelines, we have followed those each time. So a couple of questions got into this space around what are the actions that are being taken before, currently, and in the future about addressing anti-Semitism. And one thing that I kind of want to carry forward, we are specifically talking about anti-Semitism with what we have communicated through community letters, but I think this broadens to hate bias in general, right? So what are we doing to work on incidences of hate that happen at the school? And here's some update that I would really like for you to know about. Let's start with the staff specifically. So when the first incident happened, there were spaces created for staff to come down and learn about the details of that initial incident and to ask questions and to further understand kind of what we were doing to address it, which was a video message to students. We were meeting with specifically impacted students like the Jewish Student Union to work with them on the initial rollout. Subsequent to that, we've had a rolling staff meeting as we've had more incidences to provide additional information about each of those, further expand upon reporting and how we want heightened monitoring, come up with a plan, for example, in your classroom in which multiple times a day you are looking for specific incidences of drawing a swastika, which is what we faced. And so we provided that information, we looked at it, and we gave that information out to staff. They, of course, also provided us input back as administrators about things that they believe would really help the school when it comes to messaging or next steps that we want to take. So the administrative team is working on that. There were a number of training opportunities provided by the Anti-Defamation League. So Wootton staff attended. Some were specifically for administrators, some were for staff. And this particular training was about the rise of incidences in anti-Semitism and hate, and then recommended responses and pertinent information that ADL really wanted institutions to know is based on what they have learned is an effective way to respond. So one thing that really resonated me in those trainings was those academic institutions that center themselves around education itself is a recommended response approach from ADL. So we really were in that space of getting information from the experts about what we might want to do next. So those trainings have taken place. And we also shared an opportunity from within MCPS. I know many people are aware we've seen many incidences of anti-Semitism and hate reported from a number of schools. And so there was an opportunity for staff to be a part of the Alliance of Jewish Educators that is being formed. And that meeting happened this week if individuals were interested in attending that. We continue to work with the Anti-Defamation League about programs. And so there have been a number of phone calls that I've had. So I believe that there are two recommendations that are coming from our partnership with ADL. And they have done some work with high schools. Specifically, they can go back to the work that Whitman High School has done. So two programs that were recommended, and one is school-wide. This is around their No Place for Hate initiative, which is an annual project. It's an annual initiative that schools engage with and complete certain learning and tasks. We would normally do this through an advisory period, and you do this prescribed program in order to go across all staff and students and roll out a program like No Place for Hate. So we are looking at doing that. And then there's a specific group that they recommend. This is a bias training specifically to students that they have as a part of their cadre of programs that they offer, but you have to identify a specific group that you would train up on addressing bias. So we're exploring that as an option as well. For No Place for Hate, it looks very much like we would be moving that forward for the second program. We still have to figure out things like funding source, so on, but we're looking at doing that for our students. Students, as of this week, have had grade level presentations. This was in my community update to everyone. There was a group of teachers that got together to plan out how across all grade levels there would be some education that would happen for all students. They were not all the same lesson, right? So the one that I went to yesterday was someone who spoke as a family member of someone who was killed in the Holocaust, presented on that topic of what he really wanted students and staff of Wootton to know about being a family member that has had that as a part of their family history. It was a great presentation. So we have rolled out education at all grade levels. My note on this, that is not done for us, however. That is one step that is taken, but there are still groups that are working on this, and I believe there will be more that takes place. This the fifth bullet point here, there is a student group. I call this the cross-functional student group because it's stakeholders from a number of our advocacy student groups within the school. So JSU, Black Student Union, Asian Student Union, there are a number of different groups. They are coming together to do some work about how do we confront hate in general, and then inform the student body about that. So that work is happening now that we have wrapped up the other lessons. I predict that is going to start up again. We're going to figure out what we're going to do to do lessons around hate. And then we need, just to share this with everyone, we really need to start sending the message, and this is happening at so many levels, whether this is Montgomery County Public Schools and a message from the superintendent, whether this is from the administrators, and we are taking a look at that from input from students and staff. You know, we need to really be sending our message at this point in time, since incidences are increasing, about how hate bias is wrong. And we also need to make sure that individuals know if you encounter it, you must report it. So whether we are going to do that through grade level communication, whether we are doing that through lessons with our students, whether that is MCPS communicating across our school system, I just want everyone to know, like, a point that should unite us all is around the importance of not just turning a blind eye to something like that happens. Something needs to be said about that. And whether that's to a staff member, to an administrator, however you want to comfortably communicate it, things like this should be reported. Last little note on anti-Semitism, and then I'm going to take a look at the chat and see if we have some questions here. Do I believe that the actions of Wootton and MCPS will prevent acts of hate and anti-Semitism in the future? I'm glad I got asked this question. You know, I really want to spend some time just sharing my thoughts. I've gotten this one a lot. And as the principal of this building, what I want to be able to do is confidently say, I know for sure we have wrapped this up and it will not happen again. But in saying that, being truthfully honest, I believe I would be misleading everyone. We cannot fully explain why these things happen or what causes someone to be hateful or to do something that is anti-Semitic. But I believe, based on what we are seeing around our county, and that we have had these 3 specific incidences, but by no means do I think that is all of the hateful acts that we have experienced here. I do not. So I believe we are not going to be able to just see these things end at school. So then what do we need to do? Then I believe we just need to lean in on the things that we know are advisable to do when confronting hate, and that is to educate. And we have been taking steps to do that. And then we need to be able to respond. That was another thing that ADL really told us about. It is your response. So here's some thoughts on what the response should continue to be. So will we have things like additional security around? So right now, what we know the school system is working with Wootton to do is to make sure that we are looking at monitoring and protocols to be sure that we have security present to work on things such as monitoring for hate or incidences of hate. So we have adults monitoring for that as well. We're going to talk about other safety issues in the building and a couple of questions that are forthcoming. So I'm going to talk a little bit further on this in just a moment, right? But please know that MCPS is looking into security, additional resources, what they can do, because they have certainly heard from schools, particularly high schools, that this is a real need for us at this point in time. One little update that I want this community to know about, because principals were called to a meeting with the superintendent this morning. You might have seen our budget was tentatively approved by the Board of Education, and a part of that additional approval was specific funding for additional security and resources. So that leaves me hopeful. I want to say we may not stop these issues. However, I believe strongly that we need to confront, take action, and to educate, as I said earlier. And one thing that I want to, take the opportunity on this slide is to just say to everybody that is here, we have a small, but I hope powerful group on the principals chat this morning, because I believe we do need additional help and support from the Wootton community at home. So it can't be, I don't believe we will be as successful as we can be if it is just the schools being front line to confront all of this without students encountering similar actions that make it feel real and tangible for them at home. So the school system, Wootton, myself, I really believe at this point in time, we need your partnership to have conversations, to check in with students, to see what is going on. I've heard from a number of parents that say when they do raise this, students say, there's kind of nothing we can do, or it just happens and we don't feel like saying anything does anything. That cannot be our answer going forward. It will only leave us in the same place, that we will continue to have incidences like this happen. But while we can't always prevent them, we can show a different or more improved response, or we can send the message, we are doing things differently or in a more tangible way, that something is happening. So this is where we need parents to help message to their students that we need to work on this collectively and together. So those are some thoughts I wanted to share in all of this with you all. This ends my slide specifically to the anti-Semitism one. If there is any of the questions that were asked that you would like for me to go further with, go ahead and put those in the chat, and I'm going to hop off the share and let's see what we have in the chat. So I got a question about, do I believe that the individuals will ever be identified? That's a really good question. So I will give you my honest read on this. Unfortunately, if we have one person who is a repeat offender, then it's likely that would happen again if someone wants to continue to do that. And then, yes, I believe we will identify. If these are all random and across the school, that's another possible scenario. Then no, I'm not confident we will find that student or whoever it is. If it is isolated and within the 3 classrooms that it happened, it was just in that location and it was completely different students. So that is how I would answer that question. So this question is about, has Wootton administration partnered with religious organizations in the area, such as synagogues, temples, and churches? Many students involved in religious organizations and affiliated with youth groups. Very true. I've learned, very much learned this. So thank you, Rob, for this one. So the question is around partnership. I don't know if we have formalized partnerships, as it feels like our partnerships really are around those that MCPS is resourcing schools with, as well as we have moved forward specifically at Wootton with ADL. Again, they've been a really wonderful partner. What I can tell you, Rob, is we have heard from temples and synagogues. They have reached out to me and I've had conversations with them. And you'll remember a community message where I spoke about the allyship. That was really wonderful and supportive to hear, specifically from individuals, I think that work in institutions that know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of hate bias and such things. So I have had conversations with individuals in those specific groups. Just checking next questions, if you'll give me a moment. So this one is around, I know that MCPS used to have a class on religious diversity. So thank you for that one, Ali. I don't know if I've ever been in high school where we've offered that. But that sounds about right. And I'm not sure if Wootton or MCPS still offers the course, but I'm happy to offer those opportunities. Ali, can I ask you to clarify, is this the religious diversity course for students or for staff?
It was for students. So I used to come in as the rabbi and I would go to different high schools and do some of the Jewish content. So they had a textbook that was on different religions around the world, and then they would bring in different guest speakers.
Understood. So what I'll say as a little addendum here, I know that the course is still offered for teachers as a part of some of their ongoing PD. We call these the CPD courses. That course is still a part of it, and that topic is addressed, but I do not know about, I know for our course offerings next year, we don't have the religious diversity course.
Yeah, I feel like it left when COVID came. I feel like that's when, people stopped asking me to teach. But it seems more important than ever that it be brought
Certainly
back.
does. Yeah, it certainly does. What I can tell you, Ali, if there is any, information, I can tell you that our social studies office, in our Office of Curriculum Instructional Programs, the curriculum office, they've really been on the front lines of doing a lot of what needs to be done, either with curriculum, lessons, so on and so forth. So if there's any information that you want to share or connect, I can always help you connect with them if that's a possible next step.
Sure. Whatever's helpful.
Right. I will say this. I agree with you, Ali, because our students are talking a bit about, they went through an experience around remembrance and reconciliation earlier in the year. And they really saw a cohesive rollout around important content that isn't necessarily math content or science content. And so they're advocating, I've heard from some students about, we need to do something similar for hate and anti-Semitism. So I hope that feedback is reaching those that can put together a systemic message. It's a systemic teaching opportunity for our students. So. Yes, Rob. Sorry, Rob, you're still on mute.
Hey, Doug, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, sir?
Good. Thank you for everything you've been doing. Just out of curiosity, I know Good Counsel, because we know a number of people in the Wootton community that attend there. They require a class on comparative religion, regardless of what religion you are. Has MCPS ever had, even as an elective, anything comparable to that? And I think that's comparative religion is a requirement in a lot of the Catholic private schools.
So I am not aware, but I also am 4 years high school. So we might have had something like a religious diversity course. I think Ali hinted at this a little bit. I am not aware of anything, however, Rob, that is a requirement around that. So if let's say a school offered something like comparative religion, then it would be an elective, and it sounds most likely it would be through social studies. And then it would be up to the student to select that. But I can't imagine, like Good Counsel, that it would ever, I haven't seen a requirement which would be all students must take that.
Thanks.
It used to be an elective.
Do you think, Mr. Nelson, just to follow up, do you think that a comparative religion course has ever percolated up to Superintendent McKnight's office, or one of her deputy superintendents, as something for even consideration?
Oh, that one's a hard one. I don't know. I would imagine, like, as I said before, it feels like social studies office is really taking a look at that. That seems to me, they're going to know about that course. One thing I'll share with you, Rob, the courses, whether schools offer them or not, they likely very much exists. So the school system at large has a profound number of courses, and how we know we can make those courses available, it's got a course code, right? And I very much is like seeing all of those. I'm very sure they have a course code around this. It's whether schools offer them or not, or whether you're required to offer a specific course. So, I can't speak to the superintendent's office, but I would imagine that the social studies office would be able to speak to specific courses. And Rob, you have a next question, so I'll just kind of take this one. So we have a question about what is the policy if we ever do identify a student, right, who perpetrates hate bias. And one thing I just want all parents to know specifically, one of the first things we do as a part of the reporting procedures is we contact the police. And it's not because we want to turn this into like a 5-alarm fire response. It's not that. But the police have the expertise to determine if the act of hate bias reaches a specific threshold in which the police would lead on the investigation. And what schools do not want to do is move too quickly into our investigative process in which we then taint the investigation that the police themselves might conduct. Right. And I just hope that message is reaching our students. It is serious that what we are dealing with here. And if it reaches that threshold, then the school system itself would not necessarily do anything to address that student if the police are caring for, and that student is going to receive charges because of their act at school. But if it comes back to the school, and for our incidences, all of them have, then we would look at it and we would use the MCPS Student Code of Conduct. And in this particular section of the Code of Conduct, principals have wide discretion about how we would address this. The impact at our school has been profound. And so it would not be taken lightly. I cannot tell you exactly that we would do the same thing each time. I would share with you, it would be a significant consequence for acts such as this. So I hope that helps. So I have a question specifically from Brenda on this one, and I'm hoping that I'm understanding it correctly. So this one says, if the case was that you know who it was, but can't call it without proper evidence, would you have talked to the kid for targeted education and their parents? So I'm going to try my best, but jump in if I'm not going in the right direction, please. So this to me feels like, if we feel like a student might be in and around these acts, would we provide education? It's possible we would provide that education. That's very likely a part of the response if we need to work with a student. Might it be different from what everyone's getting? I do not know about that. What I can say about this final question, are you working with the parents? Most certainly, right? If it's an act like this, and unfortunately, sometimes we make these calls here at the school. We call parents right in, because something has happened, and it's just important enough that we need parents at the table with us while we're working through this. We would include parents. They're coming into the school to work with administrators, not only on the education around it, but if there are any consequences or things we need to do. Hope I got close, but I see you on your camera. So anything further, Brenda?
I did, and I got unmute because I was typing something else for everybody to see. I just said, as a Jew granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, of course, this topic touches me personally. Mm-hmm. But I also have seen in the many past years, including pandemic and everything, waves of hate towards other populations. And I know Montgomery County Public Schools and the school are working on anti-racism and other topics. I'm a firm believer that it's not just the course, this session, all this is good in general, offering all these other sessions. But in addition to that, I believe what really is shaping our kids' mindsets is the day-to-day conversations, examples, stories they're getting from their teachers in every classroom, regardless what's the subject, even if it's a math example. So when we're talking about education to the teachers, our kids spend there all day. And it's how they are teaching and giving the messages and how they're treating kids, what they see about how they're treating kids. So that's what I'm interested to understand is, in addition to an anti-Semitism course to teachers, what's the work to really point to teachers that may not be having the correct behaviors?
Well, I think there might be two things in that, right? So I'm going to start with the last thing that I heard you said. And if it is, I've said to students, and I will tell you, I say this one consistently, but I always am somewhat surprised by the response of some students, which is, I think if something is said to you and it's wrong, we need to do something about that. If it's something about the way that you're being treated, I do not think that we should just let these things pass us by. and just assume maybe they'll get better, maybe they won't. The same thing could happen again, right? So I'm interested in making sure that if something is said and it doesn't feel right, that students know, this is the whole concept behind the trusted adult, that you know who your next step person is, so you can talk this out and figure out if there is a way to go back and have this discussion. And I know that this is really loaded and layered, and it's actually going to connect to a question that's coming up as well. I feel we should do something about that, but I also recognize students are very hesitant, right? So you got to kind of follow their lead. But I think that as colleagues, adults, as professionals in a building, we can talk about these things. There was the first part though, and could you remind the thing that you said, this was about training for teachers, right? So training for teachers, I don't think this is ever a bad idea. So I think professional development, it's offered for a lot of teachers, but professional development, we can train at the school level. But there's also professional development that comes from MCPS, and there's only so much time we have to do this. So I think we just need to be very strategic. I think we have resourced some trainings to our staff around this, right? But perhaps we need to take a look at something broader but one thing I do want to connect to, I think we have something on the horizon when it comes to that training. And if we are going to go down the path, which I believe we are, to be a no place for hate school, then there will be that training around that for all staff and all students. Any follow-up, Brenda?
I'm hesitant.
Okay.
I'll drop it in there as an overall concern, and unfortunately it's going to sound vague for you, but I'm not ready to point into any specific direction. And I'm not going to put it on my kids, because I've had groups of kids in my house constantly. Thanks God, it's a nice gathering place. They don't trust the counselors. There are a couple of the counselors that they do not want to talk to. So when you said they need to know what's the next step, I have this fear and concern that if that's the next step for them inside the school, they have us in the home, hopefully the kids, most of them. But if I do have these overall concern and fear that the next step, they don't feel they have that open door. And as I said, I'm not ready to say who, why, what, but believe me, if I tell you, it's a common saying of many kids. And I'll just leave it like that so we can, I mean, if I come into a specific situation, I promise to raise it.
Yeah, I think you should. And I would just say, like, counselors don't have to be the only path, right? Sometimes it's really just your trusted staff person, right? And I'll just say, like, personally, my counselor, we got a lot, but that was not my trusted person in school, right? And that's okay. I do know I had a trusted staff person at school, and that is the important thing for me. I just think students need to know what that is, and it can be any staff member, but I do think that they should talk with the person that they trust in speaking to, right? So that would be what I would advise. Okay.
Thank you.
You got it. Allie, just wanted to acknowledge, I see you're in the chat there about the mandatory field trip to Holocaust Museum. I know that that used to be a lot of our practice. So I'm hoping, we'll see where that one goes. It has come up on our end as well. That resource, because it's near us, has come up as a possible option. So I know we're talking about it. So for everybody, we've devoted 35 minutes to this. I'm glad we had follow-up questions and questions in the chat about this. I know that we're not done with the update on hate bias and anti-Semitism in school. We will continue to work on that. I also want to make sure we devote some time to some of the following questions on another topic. So I'm going to transition to those, and we'll get started with them now. The next topic that we get into, this one's somewhat heavy as well. So, and I connected two other questions in the questions that were submitted in advance. And one of them is, how will Wootton address the drug abuse issue among students and help to keep students safe? And also, what can administration do about the vaping problem in the girls' bathroom? All right, does administration feel that students are allowed to vape in school? So I'm going to put those together because I think it centers around most oftentimes where we find this. And vaping and drug use at school still remain things you are not permitted to do at school. And I think a lot of times we say two things. It's just some initial thoughts right up front. I think oftentimes for our students, if they happen to use a substance they should not, or they're vaping in school, I think they honestly, most oftentimes, take it back to the item itself, right? It just is like you had that drug item in school, or you had that vape in your hand, and we end up focusing on the item, and we miss a very important thing. And the very important thing is, if you are someone who vapes, or you are someone who is under the influence of something, there's two things that I believe must happen. And I think we miss this most often. You are creating a distraction to your learning if you believe that you can leave and spend time smoking a vape in a bathroom, or that you can access your learning under the influence of something, right? It's just like leaving class for all of this without appropriate reasons. You're missing the one thing that we have said we were going to provide to you, and that is your education. You have immediately prevented teachers from giving you the best education that you have, and we have to confront that. And I think that is where I find myself a lot of times when talking with students. They have not even thought about this. The second part I want to say is, for vaping and for drug use, I think the most important thing we have to do, besides know about it, is we have then got to resource the student and the student's family. So I want to start there. One thing we have to remember is that disciplining this act is actually unlikely to change the behavior. It will catch it. It will do something about it. I think it's unlikely it will stop it from happening again. And so we have to resource this. So whether we are resourcing families with SASCA referrals, which is a county program that you can go to right in Rockville, and it provides you with services. You can have students tested to see if there's anything else going on, like additional substances being used. It is a resource place. So SASCA referrals are important when we're doing this work. It's possible that we need to connect you with Bridge to Wellness, which is the new program that we have here at Wootton. And we're connecting you with someone that's checking in on this. We must have some type of therapeutic approach to working with students that are doing that, because I believe we stand a better chance of rectifying the issue there than by consequencing it. But we also have to consequence, right? And again, we use the student code of conduct. And if you are a student who vapes and is caught, and if you are a student who is using drugs and we catch on to that, then a few things are going to happen, right? First of all, that administrator is going to investigate what happened, right? If a student is found in the bathroom using the vape, they are brought down by security. They're going to be searched. We have to determine if you have anything else. Same thing is going to happen if a student leaves for lunch, which you're not supposed to do. But if it happens and you come back and we can tell you're under the influence, we now need to search to see if there's anything else that you've brought back to school. And once we've conducted that investigation, then you're going to receive a consequence based upon the student code of conduct, right? And I'll just use an example of one that I would do. If you're under the influence and you come back, how can I trust you're going to be okay in regular classes? That's very likely going to be in-school suspension for you, right? So there are going to be specific actions that an administrator takes to address it. We will, of course, include parents. By no means am I responsive. I covered everything that we're going to do, but I just wanted to share an example of something that is very likely going to happen to address that behavior, because oftentimes everyone is not aware of a consequence that is applied here. I do want everybody to know about bathrooms, because that is certainly a focus, not only at Wootton, but around the school system. Bathrooms are definitely kind of under that microscope. Today at principal's office hours, we just got additional protocol guidance and information from our Office of Safety. And that is all about what security teams need to know are the consistent things that have to be happening all the time to be monitoring bathrooms. Bathrooms are a challenging place. It does have to be a private place based on its function. But when you have a private place like that, it gives way then to nefarious acts that take place. So it's a challenging thing to monitor, but we are getting additional guidance and resources from MCPS. So it's my intention, we're going to be taking those right back to security to see what we can do to kind of up our game a little bit when it comes to bathroom monitoring. So I hope that's some of the information that addresses questions 5 and 6. By no means do I think I got to everything. So I'll give just a moment to see if there's any follow-up to this topic on camera or in the chat. Okay, I'll keep looking for this one. Here's our next question. This one is about AP testing, and I'm going to throw in SAT testing because all of that is coming up, right? So this is, will Wootton host a separate AP testing information session this year? Last year, it was the week before the test when we finally got information about testing with accommodations. It would be nice for our students to be briefed a little more. So SAT actually comes before AP. So I'm going to just kind of start with accommodations and some advice. And one thing always to remember with accommodations for both of these assessments is the school system or Wootton itself, we write the plans either through a 504 plan or through an IEP in which the students receive accommodations. That does not automatically guarantee that for SAT or AP testing, that those are the same approved accommodations for testing, right? Your counselor is going to help support you in seeing what approved accommodations your child will receive. So if you have any questions about that, the first piece of advice is make sure that you touch base with your child's counselor. If your child has an IEP, you're going to also reach out to the case manager, which is in the special ed department, and you very likely know who that person is. So I really recommend that you get some of those questions answered. When it comes to this information session, it seems a little early. I do not know whether AP testing is having this information session, right? But whoever asked this question, if you want to reach out to me directly, I can connect you to the administrator over at AP testing and see what they're thinking right now. What I do know for SAT testing, that's going to come up in March. There's information that is in the community update that goes out each week. If you want to take a look at this, Mr. Roner is lead on that. And if you want to check to see, and I do advise, like, unless this is really well known or you've done this before, I would recommend checking in with your child's counselor just to see exactly where you stand, because otherwise you might surprise your child on the day of testing. So students for both of those assessments, for AP testing and for SAT, they're going to go into different rooms based upon their accommodation. And sometimes that really throws students off. Or they will have assumed they had something else, but because their College Board accommodations don't necessarily match their school-based accommodations, then they're expecting to get something and they don't. So it is just very important. They're going to be placed in rooms based on what we receive from the organization we work with. So it's best to just touch base and kind of figure out what that plan is. So here's a quick question about recommendations. So that's going to be coming up for those applying to colleges before too long. Does Wootton or MCPS have any policy limiting the number of letters letters of recommendation, a teacher may write or a student may request? There is no official policy about this. And so teachers, they know that they can be asked, and that's generally the request is made through Navient. So a teacher knows that a letter of recommendation has been requested by a specific student, but it is not a requirement that a teacher then has to write the letter of recommendation. So I kind of advise as a best practice that that's the importance of talking with the teacher. And if a teacher has received a huge number of recommendations, I've seen situations where it's almost impossible for a teacher to tackle that number of recommendations plus their job that they still have to do. And then I do know that that can be a disappointing circumstance for a student, but there is no policy that states it is a requirement that a teacher write a recommendation. Next question, can you explain what is happening with this planning class, okay? And who is going to plan senior activities next year? And what was the reason why Wootton wants to change something that has been working? So just an update in case you're unaware of this specific question and where it is coming from. Recently, we've informed students that some of the adults were working on a proposal about the current structure that is in place at Wootton and whether it serves us the best way that it can. And this involves SGA and splanning. And at Wootton, SGA is a specific class in which you have students that gather during period 6 here at Wootton, and they meet with the SGA sponsor and they tackle their work and activities and initiatives, right? And they have a specific class. There's also a class for splanning, which is senior planning. And that meets with the advisors of the senior class, and they are doing work and tax. So we have these two distinct groups. And then I'll actually take it one step further and say, then there's another additional island, right? So we have the SGA island, we have the planning island, and then we have the class officers island, which is the junior class has officers, the sophomore class has officers, and so did the freshmen. And those officers are trying to kind of coordinate the class for activities, fundraisers, participation in homecoming, participation in POTH, whatever that is, right? And all of these groups run all of these initiatives and yet are in disparate group placements around the building, right? Which is a pretty unusual setup for high schools. So the current proposal, and I want to just say this again, the current proposal, and right now meetings are happening with students and there's a little evolution and, we're working with students to see what we can do to better align these disparate groups under one collective leadership umbrella. And so I want to be clear, the idea is not that you eliminate splanning. Eliminating splanning would be cutting our foot off despite ourselves, as we absolutely have to have seniors who are fundraising, preparing for prom, graduation, senior banquet, all of these traditional things that we have to have as a school. But the question remains, does seniors planning to get all of this done, must it be a separate independent group? And I have a question about that, right? And I think other adults do too. So what I want to share with you all is that is the proposal that is being worked on. And I just want, if there are rumors out there, I just want to say, it is not that students are not being left out of it. They are absolutely being incorporated into it and their input is being considered. And there is no plan to fully eliminate any of these things. So there's my answer to that question. I'll monitor the chat. We just have a couple of these to get through, and then we'll take questions from the chat for our last couple of minutes together. I've noticed that my daughter's English class is not following the 25% rule, which states one assignment cannot be worth more than 25% in a quarter. Do you know why? I don't know why, right? But it's something we can look into. Just two things about this question, right? First, you want to reach out if you see something like this. And the other thing I say in reaching out, you do want to give some thought about how you have been monitoring that throughout the quarter. Is it something that might seem it's worth more than 25%, might by the end of the quarter be exactly where the teachers wanted it to be. And once you know you've kind of gone far enough in the quarter where this doesn't quite feel right, then you should reach out. And I would recommend you reach out to one of three people. It's totally up to you. Any one of these individuals can look into that item. First, it could be your child's counselor if you're used to communicating with them. You could reach out to the department's resource teacher. So this would be Mr. Lowe, who is the resource teacher for English. And he is currently on paternity leave, so it's Ms. Starr in his absence, or you can speak directly to your child's administrator. I think this is a straightforward email. If that's what you're seeing, just kind of share those details. And then we follow up. We look into the matter because you are correct that the policy does state one assignment should not be worth more than 25%. Here's last question of the formal ones, and then we'll go to the chat. How can a student effectively file a complaint report about their teacher anonymously? So first of all, I think it is important that we acknowledge students, right? So we certainly want to have a concern shared by a student. The next thing I want to say, because there is the modifier in here of anonymously, I just want to make a note of this, that I think that reporting anonymously creates an additional challenge, right? So I'll just speak for myself as a former teacher. If someone had a concern, it was very challenging for me to know specifically how to rectify the concern without knowing the student, as there were oftentimes very specific circumstances for each child. They're all individuals. And so for one student, you might do something differently than for another. And without kind of knowing that student's backgrounds, it's very hard. Now, we can share an anonymous concern or complaint. We often do. But I just wanted to, as a former teacher, say there's always going to be this want to kind of know who it is. And I do not believe that if a student shares a concern, that this is always a bad thing. The fear is that there's going to be some type of retribution. MCPS is prepared for that. Teachers are not permitted to act in some way of retribution because a concern has been shared, right? So that's a part of this, but I think it's a best case scenario if everyone can sit down and really openly share that concern and know the student. But if that is still a concern and you don't want to move forward that way, then you can share that report or concern in basically the three ways that I share. So I'm going to advise you think about which person makes the most sense, and whether that's your child's counselor, whether it's a teacher in a specific department, so you want to talk with the resource teacher specifically because they know the content, or whether you want to come to an administrator because it feels like it's that level that you want an administrator to know about it. You may take either of those paths to reach out. So those are our specific questions that we had and the answers to provide. Let me just check the chat to see if anything was added. Okay, the question, boy, this has really been on my mind. So here's the question. Teacher burnout has been an issue nationwide. I have been associated with Wootton since 2014 and have seen teachers, administrators leave in the last couple of years. Is teacher burnout and retention a topic of conversation among staff and administrators at Wootton? Okay. First of all, I think that this is a major concern. And I am seeing teacher burnout and concern about the profession manifesting in many places. I don't necessarily believe it is just the teachers that have been at Wootton for some time. I think that for everyone is in their own specific place. And I think that burnout and concern and questioning in our profession, in my 21 years in this particular school system, I've never seen it at this place. And it's very specific to everyone, as I said before, but I just want to say to this group that's engaged with me this morning, it's very much a real thing. We know that it goes outside of MCPS as well. I just listened to a very interesting, but actually very sad and concerning podcast about all of the different forces that are coming in on this profession that has really, I think, diminished it over time. So I don't know if I can say we've had specific conversations, but it is certainly on my mind as the principal, and I am worried about it. So when it comes to people leaving, one thing that I would just say, because I have teachers / administrators, I might draw a bit of a connection here, I guess not connection, a distinction here. You know, it might be burnout that might be impacting our teachers or things like that, but administrators, it may or may not be, right? And I do believe that MCPS is a system, right, moves administrators. There's a lot of movement within the administrative pool for a number of reasons, but movement is quite common. And while at elementary schools, maybe not as much, at secondary schools, for all of my buildings that I've worked in, administrators at the secondary level are moving quite often. I don't want you drawing, I'm not thinking of leaving or anything like that, but APs will move because for a number of reasons, they want a different level, or positions are going to shift at the secondary level because we're going to have principal interns, for example, that are about to be placed at schools. When a principal intern comes in, another AP has to leave. And that does not necessarily mean anything about burnout or concern. So I shared that to say, you know, administrators, it could be for a number of reasons why individuals have to leave, and some of them might be not for a specific reason like burnout or concern. So there are some thoughts about that one, and I'll see if anyone wants to come off camera or respond to any of these last questions that I've talked about. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Ted. So I want to go back to the accommodations question, and I have no problem saying that I was the one who asked it.
Okay.
What happened last year was, and again, I know that you're a new principal, so I know you don't know what happened, but there was this big presentation that went out over a couple of lunch hours about this is how the AP test happens, and this is where you need to report to at Shady Grove. And I kept sending the questions like, where do we go? Is there a different room for accommodations? Where are we supposed to go if our kid has the AP test accommodations? I have the note from College Board. What are we supposed to do? And it took several times of asking the question before I got the answer of, oh, well, they come to Wootton. Well, they're already taken the day off of work in order to be able to transport my kid. It was a bit of a frustration for me. And I was like, why is there a huge meeting for students who, and why is there not a separate session for those, who have accommodations? Because, again, that should be something that the school should be aware of. And we couldn't have been told earlier that my kid just could catch the bus like a regular day.
Yeah.
And so that was very frustrating. And it was very, very confusing. And then it wasn't till the day of the test that we knew which room he was going to be in. And I was like, surely the school knew this in advance. Could this not have gone out? And again, either a presentation or an email or something to the group to better prepare our students who need better preparation. That's why we have accommodations in advance of this last minute and feeling like I was running down to getting the answers.
Okay. So I definitely hear you. One thing I would start with is usually structures like that, they very rarely change for schools, right? So if the first piece of advice I would provide is if that's how structured like accommodation was at the school, and then like general rooms were at Shady Grove, that's probably likely what's going to happen again this year. I will say today, the walkthrough of Shady Grove, University of Shady Grove happens, right? So that is intended to start to figure all of these things out. So it feels like a few weeks before we would really start to take a look at that. But I would imagine we'll have a similar structure. And yes, I do believe that if students, let's say it was flipped, right? And accommodated students went to the University of Shady Grove. I don't believe that is something that can be communicated last minute, right? That just throws everything off. If it is for your school, however, I do think though on testing days, because sometimes you're finalizing numbers, right? I think it is likely that when you go into a testing location that you would find the list and then you would find your room, and that's okay, particularly if it's your own school, right? But
Right.
Students would just need to know, right? This is how we want you to come into testing that day, and what you're going to encounter is this list, and it's going to show you where to go.
And again, because my child did it last year, I kind of am guessing it's going to be the same thing this year, but I just am trying to pay it ahead to any other, new parents coming in who are going, I just don't want people doing the same thing I did.
I'm with you. Jessica, let's agree that if in, let's say like a month from now, right, not too much has started, let's check in on that and I'll give you an update, okay?
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, here's a good one from Erica. Hi, Erica. Do you recall the name of the summer extended program that is being offered by the county and where you can find more information? So is this summer school like extended year program, or is this like the Summer Rise program?
Yes, Summer Rise. I think
Summer
that's
Rise
right.
program.
Yep, where they can do externships, I think. I think that was the program. I just didn't recall the name.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
yeah, and thanks for that. I love to get this information out. First of all, I love summer school, great program, but I really love Summer Rise. So Wootton has a wonderful participation rate, and I think that this program, I mean, what school system has something like this? There is information in the community update that goes out on Sunday specifically to Summer Rise, or you can just access that by searching Summer Rise on the MCPS website, and you're going to go right to the information that you need. Information is currently out, and I want to say that they're looking for students to express interest by early March. Ideally, I doubt they'll like turn it off, but that information is out there now, and go to either place, Summer Rise through the MCPS website or through the community update, right? And just if this is new information to you, Summer Rise is where MCPS works with identified groups, like they have made the connections with some incredible either organizations, businesses, or institutes. And then students express interest to being interns, and they connect so that students can then have that experience. So sometimes students are over at like Johns Hopkins, like physics lab, like they go to NIST, really great locations, and businesses too. So if you have an interest, it's a really wonderful program, and I would encourage everyone to look into it.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay, so we are at time. If there's any other burning questions, I might be able to take one more. Otherwise, I am going to prepare to move on to my next meeting. I'll see the chat if anything happens to pop in there. I just wanted to say on a final note, I appreciate all the questions. I know some of this was very heavy, but I do appreciate having the opportunity to get some of that information out there. And I hope in a very honest way, kind of explain some of the things that have been happening. So thanks to the PTSA for always sponsoring this. I really do appreciate it. I just wanted to end on the note, we have a lot of great things that are happening too. So whether it's students that we now know are like champion fencers, we have some swimming championships on Saturday, basketball playoffs for boys start tonight, girls are on Monday. March, we're going to have a wonderful musical, scores of students placed for state level music ensembles. So there has been a flow of really wonderful news that has also been joining us, as is the case because, you know, students come here, I believe, to work really hard and give us their best and show us their talents. So I just wanted to highlight some of the really Oh, and there was the, of course, video for the high school basketball team where they go over to Falls Mead and work with them. So just really great news that's out there as well. So nice to be with you this morning. And please, if there's anything we can do for you or a question you have, don't hesitate to reach out to us.